She was just pure evil. Just can't believe she could do something like that to a baby girl. It was like, as I say, we were just a quiet, lovely family, and she like ascended from the bowels of hell and just completely devastated, wrecked our family, and took poor baby Star's life.
I told them we can't have another baby P on our hands, but the woman on the other end of the phone only asked, "What do you mean?" That chilling exchange wasn't just a warning, it was a prophecy that no one wanted to hear, and one that came true in the most devastating way. By the time authorities finally stepped inside the small flat in northern England, a little girl who once lit up every room was already gone. She had been failed, not once, not twice, but again and again by those who should have stepped in to protect her. Her family begged for help. They sent photos, made phone calls, pleaded with professionals to listen, but the doors kept closing. Each time the system turned away, the danger inside that home grew worse. So how did it come to this? How did repeated alarms raised by people who loved her most fall on deaf ears until it was too late? In this documentary, we examine one of Britain's most devastating and haunting child protection failures. We will piece together the story of Star Hobson, a 16-month-old girl whose death shocked the nation, exposed deep cracks in the safeguarding system, and raised painful questions about accountability. Star Hobson was born on the 21st May 2019 in Cayley, West Yorkshire. Court records list this date. Some early reports gave a different day, but the official record is 21st May. From the earliest photos and family accounts, she is described as cheerful, quick to smile, and responsive to music. Relatives recall a toddler who swayed to songs, clapped along, and lit up when people entered the room. These are small details, but they speak to a child who engaged easily with the people around her. Her mother, Frankie Smith, was 17 at the time of the birth. Assessments later placed her cognitive ability at an IQ of around 70, and relatives consistently described her as socially immature. In practice, this meant Frankie often needed guidance with day-to-day decisions and leaned heavily on older family members for support. Despite her age and limitations, she stated that Star was the center of her life. In the first months, Frankie was the primary carer, and much of Star's routine, feeding, sleep, and medical appointments ran through Frankie and the maternal side of the family. Star's father, Jordan Hobson, was a student when Star was born. By late 2019, he and Frankie had separated. Even after the relationship ended, he remained a named parent and maintained contact through the wider family network. His role, like that of other relatives, formed part of the informal support around Star during her first year. On the maternal side, involvement was immediate and consistent. Anita Smith and David Smith, Star's great-grandparents, were frequent caregivers. They helped with daily tasks, kept Star for visits, and provided structure when Frankie needed rest or time away. Yvonne, Frankie's mother, also played an active role, stepping in with transport, errands, and practical oversight, typical of an experienced parent guiding a first-time teenage mother. The setting for Star's infancy was ordinary for a young family in West Yorkshire. Small homes, close-knit relatives living within reach, and regular handovers between carers. Family phones filled with short videos of Star moving to a tune, laughing at a familiar face, or toddling from one pair of outstretched arms to another. Nothing in those early clips suggested isolation. Instead, they document a child surrounded by people who knew her, saw her often, and were part of her daily rhythm. The picture at this point is simple and important. A much-loved toddler, a young mother still learning, a father nearby through extended family, and grandparents and great-grandparents forming the backbone of day-to-day support. By December 2019, Frankie Smith met Savannah Brockhill at the Sun Pub in Bradford, where Savannah worked door security. She was 8 years older than Frankie, with a background in amateur boxing, and split her time between night shifts on doors and daytime shifts at a recycling plant. Within days, the contact between them was intense. Hours of calls, frequent messages, and long stretches spent together. To those around Frankie, This new relationship took center stage almost immediately. Savannah's presence was commanding. Friends and relatives describe a dynamic that moved fast, admiration from a younger partner, certainty from the older one. As the weeks passed, the tone hardened. Jealousy surfaced quickly. Savannah monitored who contacted Frankie and how often, and she made that boundary clear in public posts. In one video later shown in court, she branded herself #1 psycho, warned others to stop messaging Frankie, and asserted that Frankie was with her. The message was unmistakable. This was a possessive relationship. At home, the shift was practical as well as emotional. Frankie began arranging her days around Savannah's schedule. Late finishes, early calls, and spur-of-the-moment plans. Family members noticed a change. Time that would usually be spent on routine care now bent toward the relationship. Offers of help from older relatives increased, filling gaps when Frankie was out or distracted. To them, it looked as if the couple's needs were starting to outrank everything else. Arguments appeared early, and they were not quiet disagreements. Staff and acquaintances at the Sun Pub described raised voices that often drew attention, sharp exchanges that spilled into public view, and confrontations that left bystanders uneasy. Some rows ended as suddenly as they began, followed by displays of affection, but the cycle repeated itself with little pause. Savannah's jealousy was a constant undercurrent. She questioned who Frankie spoke to, checked her messages, and challenged even casual interactions. At times, these disputes tipped into threats, with Savannah sending alarming texts to members of Frankie's family and boasting online about her readiness to fight anyone who crossed her. On more than one occasion, there were reports of Frankie being harmed during these outbursts, leaving relatives fearful not only for her, but also for Star, who lived in the shadow of this volatility. By the end of winter, the lines were clear. Savannah set the terms of contact and pushed back hard at any perceived challenge. Frankie, young and eager to keep the peace, adapted to those terms. What began as a whirlwind romance had settled into something volatile. Close, constant, and increasingly sealed off from outside influence. The relationship placed Savannah not only at the center of Frankie's life, but also near the center of Star's day-to-day world. A position of trust that carried responsibility, and one that worried the people who had supported Frankie from the beginning. The first formal warning landed on the 27th January 2020. Holly Jones, a friend who had cared for Star, contacted social services after noticing marks she could not reconcile with the explanations she was given. A social worker visited the home twice. Basic checks were carried out. The file was closed with no further action. In May 2020, concern shifted from observations to reports of rough handling. Anita Smith, Star's great-grandmother, called social services after hearing that Savannah Brockhill had been physically aggressive with the child. Anita's position in the family gave her a clear view of Star's day-to-day life, and she had already been offering regular hands-on support. She stressed that the risk felt immediate and asked for a fresh assessment. A visit followed. Again, the outcome was to close the case. June 2020 marked the most direct escalation. Jordan Hobson, Star's father, received a short video clip that left him deeply unsettled. In the footage, Star appeared with visible bruising across her face. The marks were clear enough that Jordan felt he could not ignore them. He immediately contacted social services and insisted that his daughter be medically examined. Police were notified and arrangements were made for Star to be seen at hospital. Doctors documented the injuries, but after hearing the explanation that she had stumbled into a coffee table, they concluded the bruises were the result of an accident. On that basis, authorities decided the threshold for further safeguarding action had not been met, and the case was left without progression. During the same month, the net of concern widened. Alicia, one of Frankie Smith's sisters, reached out with messages and images that, in her view, showed Star was not safe. She flagged specific incidents and urged officials to look again. Separately, a family acquaintance, Rachel Whiteley, passed on her own observations to authorities, reinforcing the picture relatives were trying to convey. There was an ongoing pattern, not a one-off event. These contacts were logged alongside Jordan's referral, but they did not change the status of the case. On the 2nd September 2020, the fourth referral was lodged by Frank Smith, Star's grandfather. He had seen Star with another visible facial bruising and reported it promptly. He asked for an urgent visit and for professionals to speak directly to relatives who had been raising alarms throughout the year. A short assessment followed. Explanations were accepted. The file remained open only briefly. 5 days later, on the 7th September 2020, social workers visited again and closed the case. The decision rested on 3 pillars: the benign explanations offered by the adults in the home, the earlier medical assessment that had not found a safeguarding trigger, and a view, now repeated over several months, that family reports were influenced by personal conflict around Frankie's relationship. Officials recorded that they had seen the child, had been satisfied with the presentation on the day, and did not require further intervention. Across these 5 referrals, the pattern is clear. Each time a relative or carer raised a specific concern, the response focused on narrow snapshots: a single visit, a single explanation, a single medical note. Each time, the wider picture offered by the family, the pace of the relationship, the controlling behavior, the repeated appearance of unexplained marks, the child's changing demeanor, was reduced to background noise. Relatives did not stop calling. They adjusted, adding images, forwarding messages, and asking for a senior review. The outcome did not change. By early September, the paper trail showed 5 distinct points of contact: Holly Jones on 27th January, Anita Smith in May, Jordan Hobson in June, supported that month by Alicia and by Rachel Whiteley, Frank Smith on the 2nd September, and a final closeout recorded after a brief home visit on the 7th September. At every turn, the standard safeguarding question, "Is there an immediate risk that requires decisive action today?" was answered in the negative. For the family, the effect was cumulative. Each closure deepened their fear that the warnings were not being heard on their own terms. Each new contact repeated the same core point: the situation was not stable, and the child needed a protective response that looked beyond a single day's presentation. Those appeals did not shift the assessment, but within days of that final closure, CCTV would record what social workers had refused to believe. Days after the final case closure, the situation escalated in ways that could be measured and replayed. On the 13th of September 2020, a camera at a Doncaster recycling plant captured Savannah Brockhill inside a car with Star. The footage, later recovered and examined frame by frame, provided a precise record of conduct that had previously been described only in warnings from relatives. CCTV showed Brockhill handling Star aggressively with force on multiple occasions inside the car. Investigators would later conclude that this behavior was both deliberate and dangerous. There was no confusion over what the camera revealed. It was clear, sustained, and deliberate. That same day, Brockhill conducted online searches that prosecutors later presented in court. Can you die from being winded, and how long can you go without sleep? The timing mattered. It placed her state of mind alongside the footage, giving investigators a match pair of data points: what was done and what she wanted to know. These weren't random lookups. They aligned with a day in which a child had been handled with unjustifiable force, now preserved on video. Inside Frankie Smith's world, the circle tightened further. Brockhill's control of everyday contact deepened. Calls screened, messages checked, visits questioned or cut short. Family members who had been part of Star's routine found themselves kept at a distance, asked to wait, or told they were causing trouble. The practical effect was isolation. People who knew Star best, those who noticed small changes in her behavior and appearance, were given fewer opportunities to see her, and less time when they did. Relatives continued to act. David Fawcett and Anita Smith, the great-grandparents who had cared for Star often, posted photographs online to show why they were worried. Images of a child in better days next to images that, in their view, showed decline. It was a direct appeal to anyone who might listen. Responses were swift and emotional, but the practical outcome was the same. Explanation met with reassurance from the adults in the home, and little changed. On the 20th September 2020, Another camera offered another look. City center footage in Bradford recorded Frankie with Star on child reins. The child's posture was slumped, movement was slow and unsteady. Frankie dragged her forward through the street, intent on getting from one point to another. Passers-by glanced over and kept moving. The clip, later paused and replayed in court, showed a toddler who did not appear well and a carer fixed on completing a task rather than responding to the child's condition. In the same period, the couple's stance toward the wider family hardened. Brockhill framed relatives' concerns as interference. Contact lists were trimmed, numbers were blocked. Practical support that had once been routine, lifts, food, short stays to give Frankie rest, was replaced by a new rule. Access was on the couple's terms, and those terms kept tightening. This wasn't simply about control. It had measurable consequences. The fewer face-to-face moments relatives had with Star, the fewer chances there were for someone to document change and press for immediate reassessment. What distinguishes this week is not only the behavior, but the record it left behind. The 13th of September CCTV clip provided a clear evidence of the Savannah repeatedly being physically aggressive towards Star. The searches that followed pinned down intent and awareness. The 20th September footage offered an external view of Star's condition in public, 2 days before the event that would bring emergency services to the flat. Together, these pieces formed a timeline that investigators could later chart with specificity. Date, place, actions, and the narrowing of Star's world as contact with protective relatives fell away. The week between 13th and 20th September would become a central exhibit in court. A measured pattern of conduct, on camera and time-stamped, showing risk rising while access to safeguards fell. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon in Keighley, West Yorkshire, the small flat where 16-month-old Star Hobson lived with her mother and her mother's partner became the setting for a tragedy that would shake the nation. In the early hours of that day, Savannah Brockhill became angry after Star had torn up a ticket for a music event she had been planning to attend. What might have been shrugged off by most adults became a trigger for fury, and from that moment, Savannah Brockhill's attention was fixed on the toddler. At 3:03 p.m., records show Brockhill used her phone to look up replacement tickets. Just over half an hour later, at 3:34 p.m., Frankie Smith searched online for "shock in babies" and "baby in shock." Those searches are critical. They suggest that by this time Star had already been injured, and rather than seeking immediate medical help, Frankie turned to the internet for guidance. What followed was a delay, no less than 11 minutes, before anyone called 999. In cases of severe trauma, those minutes can be the difference between life and death. When paramedics arrived at the flat at 4:04 p.m., they found Star unresponsive. The emergency crew worked quickly and transported her to hospital. Doctors fought to revive her, but the damage had already been done. Star was pronounced dead that same afternoon. The medical findings were stark. Specialists discovered that she had suffered a catastrophic internal injury. Her inferior vena cava, one of the body's largest veins carrying blood to the heart, had been torn. The force needed to cause such damage was compared to that seen in road traffic collisions. This was not the kind of injury that could happen from a fall at home, as was claimed in the 999 call. It required massive, targeted force. Forensic examination revealed more. Alongside the fatal injury were older, previously untreated fractures. Several ribs had been broken weeks earlier. A tibia, the shin bone, had been fractured and then fractured again. There was also evidence of an older skull injury and internal trauma. Taken together, the results painted a chilling picture. Star had not suffered a one-off accident. She had been subjected to repeated assaults over time. The court later concluded beyond doubt that the fatal blow on 22nd September was delivered by Savannah Brockhill. It was either a powerful punch, a stamp, or a violent kick to the abdomen. The strike tore the vein and caused catastrophic internal bleeding. Doctors were clear. There was no accidental explanation for the level of force required. The digital evidence added context. At the same time as Star was suffering fatal injuries, Brockhill was searching online about concert tickets. Frankie was typing questions into Google about how to treat a baby in shock. These actions revealed priorities and choices in those critical minutes before help was sought. When Brockhill finally dialed 999, she told the operator that Starr had fallen, that she had simply banged herself. But once doctors reviewed the findings, that account collapsed. The science, the scans, and the expert testimony all pointed in the same direction. This was not an accident. By the evening of 22nd September 2020, a toddler who had danced to music, who had been passed between the arms of grandparents and great-grandparents, and who had been loved and cherished in her first months of life, was gone. The explanation that she had just fallen would not survive the scrutiny of investigators. Within days, the evidence would make it clear Starr's death was the result of deliberate violence, not misfortune. And from this moment forward, the focus shifted. From the desperate efforts of doctors to save her life, to the investigators tasked with piecing together how such brutality could happen in a home that had been flagged to authorities again and again. When detectives entered the Keighley flat, they treated it as a full crime scene. Phones, tablets, and a laptop were seized, while neighbors and businesses were asked for CCTV. The digital trail revealed crucial evidence. Cameras from a Doncaster recycling site captured Savannah Brockhill striking Starr repeatedly in a parked car days before her death. City center footage from Bradford showed Frankie Smith dragging Starr on reins while the child appeared weak. These images provided a clear timeline of escalating harm. Forensic examination of the seized devices added another layer. Investigators recovered internet searches made shortly before the 999 call, queries about shock in babies, and about the effects of heavy impact. Combined with earlier searches such as "Can you die from being winded?", the data pointed to awareness of serious risk before help was sought. Doctors gave evidence that Starr's fatal abdominal injury required massive force, as strong as a car accident. They ruled out a low-level fall, directly contradicting the account given to paramedics. Further scans uncovered older fractures to ribs, a tibia, and the skull, showing a pattern of repeated harm. Psychologists were called to assess Frankie Smith. Testing placed her intelligence at around 70 in the bottom 2% of the population. She was described as abnormally compliant, highly suggestible, and prone to deferring to stronger personalities. While this did not excuse her actions, it helped the court understand her passivity and her repeated acceptance of Brockhill's explanations. With CCTV, phone searches, and medical testimony aligned, West Yorkshire Police concluded that this was not an accident. The evidence established that Savannah Brockhill delivered the fatal blow, and that Frankie Smith, through failure to protect her daughter despite mounting warnings, carried criminal responsibility for allowing it to happen. The case reached Bradford Crown Court in the autumn of 2021. For weeks, jurors were led through a carefully reconstructed timeline drawn from CCTV, digital downloads, and forensic reports. Prosecutors said it showed a clear pattern of harm and control that ended with a fatal assault inside the Keighley flat on the 22nd September 2020. Both women denied any unlawful violence. Savannah Brockhill denied murder. Frankie Smith denied causing or allowing her daughter's death. But before the trial even began, Brockhill faced her own ordeal behind bars. While on remand, she was attacked by fellow prisoners in an incident that left her badly injured and close to death. Reports from that time noted she had become a target inside the prison system, her case already notorious. By the time she appeared in court, she did so under heightened security and with visible signs of the risks she faced from others in custody. Inside the courtroom, the focus remained firmly on the evidence. The jury watched CCTV from a Doncaster recycling site that showed Brockhill being repeatedly physical aggressive to Starr in a parked car just 9 days before the 999 call. They were also shown separate city center footage of Starr 2 days before her passing, visibly weakened. Jurors examined Frankie's phone history, which contained searches about medical emergencies entered before emergency services were contacted. Doctors testified that Starr's fatal abdominal injury required massive force, comparable to what is seen in road collisions. They also identified older, healing fractures that confirmed she had been injured on previous occasions. Prosecutors argued that this evidence ruled out accident and established a sustained pattern of harm. The court also heard about Frankie Smith's psychological profile. A forensic psychologist assessed her as highly compliant, with an IQ of around 70, placing her in the bottom 2% of the population. This explained her passivity and her tendency to defer to stronger personalities, but the Crown maintained it did not excuse her legal duty to protect her daughter. Frankie's sister testified that she had warned her repeatedly to leave the relationship and had raised concerns with authorities months before the tragedy. On the 14th December 2021, the jury delivered its verdicts. Savannah Brockhill was convicted of murder. Frankie Smith was convicted of causing or allowing the death of a child. The following day, Brockhill received life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years. Smith received 8 years. In March 2022, the Attorney General referred Smith's sentence to the Court of Appeal, arguing it was unduly lenient. The appeal judges agreed, increasing it to 12 years. Brockhill's life sentence and minimum 25-year term were upheld.
Now, 2 women will be sentenced later today for their parts in the murder of 16-month-old Star Hobson from Keighley in West Yorkshire. Star's mum, Frankie Smith, was cleared of her daughter's killing yesterday, but found guilty of causing or allowing Star's death to take place.
Yeah, well, Smith's partner, Savannah Brockhill, was found guilty of Star's murder, and the pair will be sentenced this afternoon. The report from our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, Kevin Larkin, obviously contains content that some viewers may find distressing.
16-month-old Star Hobson, another child failed in Britain. Failed by her mum's partner who ended her short life. Failed by her mum who allowed Star to be killed. And failed by the authorities who didn't prevent her death.
Star, do you love your mums? Do you love me?
Star's mum, Frankie Smith, was cleared of murder at Bradford Crown Court yesterday, but the 20-year-old was convicted of causing or allowing her daughter's death.
If you want to keep your kneecaps, I suggest you stop sending her them. She's with the #1 psycho.
28-year-old Savannah Brockhill, who ended Star's life less than a month after this video was taken.
She was crying and then she stopped crying and then she was sick. And now she's just a little bit floppy, to be honest with you.
The response from the community was immediate and public. In Saltaire, families gathered in Roberts Park for candlelit vigils and a balloon release in Star's memory. Flowers and soft toys lined the railings. Messages from strangers stood beside notes from relatives who had tried to raise the alarm. The events were quiet, respectful, and pointed to the same question: how could so many warnings be missed? Within Star's wider family, the toll was heavy. Frankie's father, Andrew Smith, died in 2021 after a period of profound distress linked to what had happened. His death became part of the story relatives told about loss, regret, and the feeling that their concerns had not been heard when it mattered. National attention followed. In May 2022, the National Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel published a joint review of Star's case alongside that of Arthur Labinjo Hughes. The report set out recurring themes: poor sharing of information between agencies, over-reliance on brief home visits, undue optimism when hearing explanations, and pressure on frontline teams. It called for stronger multi-agency child protection units, better supervision for complex cases, and a culture that tests explanations against evidence rather than accepting them at face value. Policy changes were not left on paper. In April 2023, Bradford's Children's Social Care Services were transferred into a new independent body, the Bradford Children and Families Trust. The aim was clear: create a structure with sharper accountability, more stable leadership, and the capacity to deliver consistent safeguarding practice across the district. Police oversight also moved. Following reviews in 2023, West Yorkshire Police adopted learning points on how child risk calls are assessed, recorded, and escalated. The guidance emphasized early supervision on repeat concerns, clearer thresholds for joint investigations, and better linkage of separate reports that may describe the same pattern. The combined effect of these steps, public mourning, national review, structural change, and policing lessons, was a shift in how professionals and the public talk about child protection. The message is simple and practical. Listen to relatives who raise concerns, test explanations against independent evidence, and act quickly when patterns emerge. If you believe stories like Star's must never be repeated, help us keep them alive. Subscribe for more true crime documentaries, share to raise awareness, and join the discussion in the comments. Protecting children isn't just a responsibility. It's a worldwide mission.